Welcome, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, to our eighth webinar in the COVID period. My name is Ralph Biederman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-America chapter of the U.S.-Mexico Chamber of Commerce. We are happy to have these webinars co-hosted by the Consulate General of Mexico here in Chicago. We're talking about a subject that we hear more and more about every day in the news: electric vehicles. This takes me back to my youth. It was 1962, and I was a sophomore in college, and I got my first car. It was a 1957 Chevy convertible. It was a great car, but I spent a lot of time under it and under the hood, doing brakes, shocks, mufflers, points, plugs, starters, whatever. It was easy to do for me back then. Now I have a 2022 Hyundai Santa Fe. For 2 years, I've only been under the hood twice, and that was to put in windshield wiper washer fluid. And probably I don't have the capability of doing anything under the car anymore. So here we are, 60 years from 1962 to 2022. And technology has certainly added a lot to the automotive industry in terms of design and manufacturing. And that's what got us here to electric vehicles today. But electric vehicles are a little bit different animal. Things are different. We have different components, a different supply chain, a different manufacturing, and different manufacturers. So we've had 5 speakers that are with us today going to help us iron out some of these. But first, let me do a little commercial for myself. You hold on a second. U.S.-Mexico Chamber is a binational chamber with headquarters in both Washington and Mexico City. The purpose of the chamber, of course, is to build mutually beneficial trade and investment relationships between our two countries. The chamber was incorporated as a 501c6 nonprofit in 1973. So this year, we are celebrating 50 years. And in addition, our chapter, the Mid-America chapter, is celebrating 29 years. Today, we have 18 chapters, 10 in the US and 8 in Mexico, with a total membership of over 550 companies and organizations. We have numerous groups and task forces in the chamber, such as the North American Working Group, comprised of members that review and analyze trade issues and then provide recommendations to appropriate agencies of government in both countries. Since May of 2017, we've been holding live breakfast series sessions with members and friends to openly discuss trade issues and their impact on their organizations. Of course, since COVID, we haven't been able to do that, but we are providing updates by email on issues to this growing group of concerned individuals in the Chicagoland area. You can check us out at www.usmcocma.org and go to the resources page, where we have a veritable library of documents having to do with trade and investment. Here's the lineup for today. Ambassador Reynard Torres is the Consul General of Mexico here in Chicago. Thomas Clare and Kristen Drizak are both with the Federal Reserve Bank of Mexico. Miguel Montoya is the CEO of the Automotive Cluster of Nuevo León. Dr. Jose Zozoya is the executive president of the Mexican Association of the Automotive Industry. And Larry Friedman is a partner with Barnes, Richardson, and Coburn. So with that, let me turn it over to the ambassador. Happy to have you here again, and thank you over all these webinars for all of your support, you and your staff.
On the contrary, Ralph, thank you so much. As usual, this seminar is very timely. The topic that you chose is very important right now for many reasons, and we're looking forward to listening from our panelists all the details. But as I said, the partnership that we have developed in these years with the U.S.-Mexico Chamber of Commerce, in particular with the Mid-America chapter, is fantastic. So I really appreciate this alliance, Ralph, and we're really hoping to continue this year and in the coming years the good work that we have been able to do in the last years. As I said, this topic is very, very timely, and not only because it's very much in fashion right now to talk about these things and how we all are, very concerned about the environment, which is a good thing. I mean, if it's fashionable, it helps the industry and it helps the environment. But not only because of that, this new wave of interest in how the markets are changing to make our daily life more sustainable. All the things that we consume and all the items and the electric items that are electronic items that surround us, to have that component of sustainability is very important. To be aware of that. And it's not only something, as I said, that is in fashion, it's part of where the economies are going. And that is also very, very important. It makes sense for many reasons to think about this in the future. And of course, the electronic vehicle market is huge. We have seen how it has grown here in the United States. And of course, what the federal government has done to put incentives out there for the companies that are producing these cars is very important and is helping. But not only the federal government, but also the local governments. There, have found that in order for us to continue this impulse of sustainability or economies that are, aware of this component, it's important to put the incentives out there. And of course, being Mexico and the US so close in terms of how our markets work, how our production work, is very important for us to be aware of this, and not only that, but also align the efforts that we are doing in Mexico to make sure that we take advantage of what's going on here and we're able to participate in these efforts. So you have heard, I'm pretty sure that you have heard about this investment that Tesla recently announced in the state of Nuevo León. Is a $5 billion to build a plant, and produce a new generation electric vehicles. So there is a lot of excitement in Mexico about this, not only from the public officers that were part of this announcement, but in general for the public. I mean, Mexicans are also quite aware of the changes in the markets and the changes in the way we conduct our daily lives. So we all want to see more of this. And we want to make sure that this new offer in sustainable elements and components is available to everybody. But not only that, also the Minister of Foreign Affairs launched a couple of years ago a partnership with the University of California in something called the U.S.-Mexico Task Force for the Electrification of Transport in Mexico. So many institutions in Mexico have been working really closely with the University of California to support this binational effort, particularly in the automotive sector, with the objective of keeping the industry modern and attractive for foreign investment. And that's the other thing. I mean, we hear many things in the news and in the media about what's going on with the Mexican economy. We all were quite aware of the process of modernization of what was NAFTA, now is USMCA. So there are many stakeholders that want to learn more about that and make sure that the companies and the states in Mexico kind of seize the opportunities that are brought or open by the USMCA. And in terms of foreign investment, the news are good. They're really good. Just to give you an example, there was a 12% increase on foreign direct investment from 2021 to 2022. So that's, of course, good news. The states are getting the largest part of this foreign investment. Of course, Mexico City, Nuevo León, Jalisco, Baja California, Chihuahua. We want to see more. And I'm pretty sure that the different authorities at a local level are already working on that. So now the challenge is to seize those opportunities, to make sure, as Ralph said, that the supply chains are not the same. I mean, we're very much experts by now on what happens in the automotive industry, in terms of supply chains and how everything works. So Mexico has done really well in that regard, in aligning the industries and the two countries. But now there is this new challenge because things are different. So many things are going to have to be modified. And so the seed that is planted already in Mexico, I'm pretty sure that it's going to grow larger and larger. And this partnership and this closeness that we have in our supply chains and our markets in terms of the automotive industry are going to extend to the electric vehicles. I'm pretty sure of that. So I'm not going to speak more about this because we have the experts here. And of course, I am not an expert, and I'm delighted to have such an interesting panel. I'm just going to leave you with one last message. Talking about the closeness of our alliances and partnerships, we are organizing for the second year in a row what we have called the Mexico Week in Chicago. And the idea is precisely that, to showcase what Mexico is, not only in terms of art and culture, but also in terms of small businesses, large businesses. So this year, we're going to be featuring the state of Jalisco, talking about one of the states that receives a large amount of foreign direct investment. And we're going to have, of course, a lot of agave spirits, not only tequila, mezcal, tequila tastings, gastronomy all over the town. But we're also going to have a small market in Navy Pier. For those that know Chicago, know what an interesting spot is Navy Pier. So Mexican producers and small businesses are going to be able to showcase their products right there in Navy Pier. So I invite all of you that are around the Chicago area to come and be part of this celebration, the Mexico Week in Chicago. We start our events on May the 5th with a huge kickoff of these events in Navy Pier. And you're welcome to follow our social media so you can see all the events and all the different opportunities for you to enjoy the state of Jalisco and the state of Jalisco's presence here in the Midwest. So I'm going to end with that note. Hopefully that you are getting excited about the possibility to attend one of those tequila and mezcal tastings. So thank you. Thank you so much, Ralph.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you for the great relationship we have between your consulate and our chamber. It's working out very well, and we'll see you at Cinco de Mayo at Navy Pier. Have a nice afternoon, Ambassador. Okay, now we'll turn it over to Thomas and Kristen at the Federal Reserve Bank. Thomas, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Ralph. Let's see if you can see my slides. All right. Your timing is impeccable. In terms of the topic, right? So let's talk about electrification. And the topic I want to address first is the issue of the vehicle production footprint. I should say I'm joining this webinar today from my office here at the Chicago Fed. That what I'm about to say are my own views and not necessarily represent those of my employer or anybody else in the Federal Reserve System. So now that we got the disclaimer out of the way, we can talk about the fun stuff. Electric vehicles. So huge transformation of the auto industry underway right in front of our very own eyes. At the same time, the industry is heavily integrated across the 3 countries in North America. So the question I want to talk about for a few minutes is, what does this mean? How should we envision the question of, oops, my slides are not showing. Hold on. Now what?
You got to use share screen.
Yeah, I did. So,
and then click on your PowerPoints in the files.
Okay, let's start this again. Share screen. All right. All right, that's what I'm doing. And my PowerPoint is already open. I don't know why it's not showing up, but
it's okay. Take your time. Yeah, if you just go to your PowerPoints and that particular file, it ought to do it.
That's where I am. I don't know why it's not showing.
You want Kristen to start up ahead of you, or?
Yeah, we can do that. I'm not sure that's going to help much, but at least it's not going to slow us down anymore. So Kristen, if you want to go ahead, maybe Ralph can try to upload the slides from his end.
I see it.
Oh, you see it now? Hold on. Okay. Well, maybe. All right. So
There you go.
I want to do this. Let me make this bigger.
No, I'm sharing it. So is this the view you want, or do you want me to switch the views? I can't tell.
Okay. Hold on. I gotta go
Thomas,
back.
I'm showing
Yeah.
it.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, that's cool. You can make it bigger too.
Okay, I'll see if I can do that.
Otherwise, we'll go with this. There you go. That's teamwork. I'm not sure what's happening on my end. All right, I'll just go ahead. So the question I'm talking about here is, you know, where, so thinking about electrification of the industry, you have a really good understanding about how the current industry is integrated across the production footprint in North America. So how should we envision this production footprint of electric vehicles to look like? So next slide, please, Kristen. So to visualize the current state of the industry, I went to 2021. The slide here shows you to scale all the locations in North America that make what we call in the industry terminology light vehicles. That's the kind of products that you and I as a consumer would purchase. So, you know, from the small car all the way up to the full-size pickup truck. Just under 13 million units were produced last year, not last year, in 2021. All the plants are showing are plants that only produce internal combustion engine based vehicles. Let's see, not sure why this is not going to the next level here. There we go. And so
You
what
are
we can
not
see.
in control of it, Thomas. I'm controlling it. So tell me when you want me to click.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. No, you're good. So what we see the industry is obviously it's a well-known fact that the industry is very concentrated in space. It's we talk about this in terms of clustering, and the two big areas that are outlined in red is what we talk about, the auto alley, auto corridor, extending from the state of Michigan all the way south to the Gulf of Mexico, and then there's over the last 2.5 decades. A significant cluster also in the interior of Mexico, centered around Mexico City. That's what the industry looks like. In 10 years, we're going to look back at this. This is what it was like when we produced the internal combustion engine-based vehicles. And so then the question is, how should we envision this footprint to evolve going forward? One more comment about this map I already mentioned. So these symbols represent vehicle assembly plants only. And they're scaled to size because we know at each of these locations we know what the actual output was in 2021. Incidentally, the location of the complementary engines and transmissions are very, very similar to the region indicated here by the black circles. So before we go one slide ahead, in order to give us a glimpse into the future of what the electric world would look like, what I've done is I've gathered information on all the vehicle assembly plants that currently make electric vehicles in North America, and all the plants that make batteries for electric vehicles. And then I scoured the web and company websites and so on and so forth for announcements. And any plant that's been announced, I also put on the slides, with the exception of a couple that I ended up forgetting when I put the slide together, but I'll talk about those in a second. So Kristen, if you could advance the slide. So here, notice that the symbols now no longer scale to size, just because, I can't base it on actual output for most of those. Most of those plants are either currently under construction or will, in the foreseeable future, will start production. So that explains why all the circles are the same size. And then what is shown on the map here is only locations where battery electric vehicles are being produced and the batteries that go into those vehicles. The symbols have two different colors, of course. All the green ones represent battery plants, and the dark gray ones represent battery vehicle assembly plants. And again, many of these plants you can't see in operation yet today. Okay, so then, at that high level, that resembles actually pretty closely, even though not perfectly, the pattern that we're observing under the internal combustion engine regime. So Kristen, if you could advance one more. So I'm repeating now the two rectangles, right? So, and they capture almost as large of a share of the symbols on a map as in the current situation. Not quite. So what are the exceptions here? Let's look at the state of so before we go there, let's think about who is, what are the players that are on this map? So there are two types of producers of electric vehicles. That's what we call the incumbents, the car companies that would have been on the earlier map, right? The General Motors, the Toyotas, the Hyundai Kias of the world, the VWs. And then the other category is what we call the newcomers to this industry. Electrification is a radical departure from the core knowledge in this industry, and that opens the door to players that have not been able to enter the industry due to high barriers to entry to now do so. So the first one was, of course, Tesla. And then there are many others. It remains to be seen how many of these will still be around in 10 or 15 years time. But anyway, they are on the map. So let's talk about some of these dots that are outside the dashed rectangles or the dashed, yes. So let's talk about California, Nevada. There's a battery plant in Nevada that goes with Tesla's original assembly plant in the Bay Area, Fremont, California. There is also the Faraday assembly plant in California, and then a Tesla battery plant that is adjacent to the Fremont assembly plant. So that's the story here. Let's look at Arizona in the greater Phoenix area. The Lucid is producing vehicles, and a battery plant is being built as we speak. That is by LG. And so that explains primarily why we're deviating a bit from the footprint that currently exists. If you think about why we actually have a fair amount of persistence, what's typical for an incumbent producer like a General Motors or a BMW, if they have an existing, as they prepare for the transition towards electrification, it is standard practice, has been so far, and it seems like it's going to persist going forward. If you switch out production from a plant that makes internal combustion engine vehicles to one that makes battery electric vehicles, that is relatively easy to do within the footprint of the specific assembly plant. So you take an existing site and you reconfigure it. It's been done numerous times. There are a few exceptions to that, but typically, and the existing plant would be reconfigured. That explains the persistence of the footprint. When you go to battery plants, that story doesn't quite hold up because, the equivalent would be, oh yeah, I'm GM and I'm taking my engine plants and I'm going to convert them to battery plants. It's not that simple. On the battery plant side, typically your site criteria are sufficiently different in terms of size and in terms of power needs to produce these batteries, that what's typically done by both newcomers to the industry as well as incumbents, that battery plants tend to be built on greenfield locations. So you tend to have new locations there. When you put it all together though, battery plants tend to be nearly as tethered to the vehicle assembly plants in the electric sort of environment as current internal combustion engine plants are to vehicle assembly plants. They're heavy objects. You don't want to ship them over large distances. And that's what you end up with in this map. Now let's talk about Mexico. There's a couple of dots I forgot to put in there. We have one green dot showing, that's the cattle battery plant in Juarez. That's on the books. BMW more recently announced that they're going to also build a battery plant in Mexico in San Luis Potosi. And then it was mentioned earlier, Tesla's plant has been announced in the Monterrey area. Currently, Ford is producing the Mach-E in their Cuautitlán assembly plant, and then General Motors also has announced plans to produce a couple of electric models in, I think it's Ramos Arizpe assembly plant in Mexico. So that's the story. At a high level, the production footprint seems to be changing only at the margin. Now, having said that, there, of course, is a lot of turbulence, a lot of adjustment if you break this down to specific site selection issues, to site choices, right? It doesn't mean every community that currently has a plant will keep that plant. Depends on what happens. Is it battery? Is it vehicle assembly? And then it gets much more complicated when we go down all the way to the supply chain, right? Electric cars have far fewer parts. There are certain items that will completely go away. Radiators, for example, and other pieces, mechanical pieces that support current internal combustion engine-based architectures. So there's going to be a large amount of upheaval all the way down the entire supply chain. Some of those changes will result, of course, in changing fortunes for individual companies, and that could imply then as well a relocation of specific production sites. So I'm not trying to say that every plant's going to stay on that's already in the industry today. The basic principle that's driving the footprint, though, and that's going to be, I'm going to close out on that thought, goes back to a principle of economic geography. Vehicles is a textbook style example of a classic weight gaining good. That is to say, thousands of pieces get put together and they ultimately end up in a vehicle assembly plant. And from there, the final product gets shipped to the customer. So vehicle assembly takes place in an area of that is central to the market in the country. So Auto Alley tends to be closely related to where the population centroid in the United States is, because typically a specific model gets only made at one location, and from there it gets shipped to customers all across the country or all across North America. So despite all the change when it comes to that we observe as the industry switches over to electrification, when it comes to the high level discussion of the footprint of the industry in North America, there's actually remarkable stability that I see going forward. And with that, I want to say thank you to Kristen for advancing my slides that I couldn't manage to get up on the screen for everybody. And I'm also handing the baton to you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for a great presentation. Kristen, it's all yours.
Well, great. Thank you. Were you seeing Thomas's whole slide or were you seeing just the PowerPoint version of it? Was it full screen?
Yeah, full screen.
Okay, great. So I'm going to try to do that with mine too. We have complications within the bank for about some things. So let me see if I can find mine. Hold on. So since his are up, mine are not. All right.
Did he get out of share screen and before you went on?
I got him out of share screen.
Okay.
So I'm just going to share the whole darn screen and start from that. There's my
That's okay.
email. All right. Are you seeing the full screen or just the presenter view?
See the whole slide.
Okay,
Not-
excellent.
Not in
So
the
I
whole
have the
screen,
same.
but
You see the whole slide. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have the same disclaimer as Thomas, speaking only for myself, not him or anybody else at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago or the system. I don't talk for Jay Powell ever. And I want to start off with, Mexico is a very important part of the North American industry, and about 30% or thereabouts of U.S. sales are, I'm sorry, of U.S. imported sales overall come from Mexico. And we find similar trade patterns if you look at the ITA data for the new category for electric vehicles. About 30% of U.S. EV sales were imported. Mexico was about 22.6% of the U.S. BEV imports. And this is a broad category that includes all sizes of vehicles, really. But Mexico was the third largest source of imported EVs behind the EU, with about 40%, and South Korea with 30%. The matching the data up to what is actually coming in when it's pretty much just the Mach-E right now. Okay, well, that's what I asked Thomas, is whether you were seeing it in the way I wanted to show it or not. So let me see. How's that?
You can
Better?
see that?
Or are you seeing the PowerPoint version?
Kristen, this is Larry. Right now you're in the PowerPoint view, not in the show view.
I don't know why it does this. Let me see if I just switch the screen over. Let me close that down. Don't need to be seeing that. I don't know what to do. I'll just make it bigger. Hold on a second. Was Thomas's that way too?
It was. Yeah.
And you didn't tell me. Let me see if I can.
Did you click on your share screen?
I did,
So
but
did
I
it-
clicked out of it because I'm trying to make this work right.
Okay,
I'm kind of a stickler for things being right, and it's annoying me.
we'll stick with
Um,
you.
How about now?
Yeah,
Okay,
There you go. Full
yeah,
screen.
there you go.
kind of a stickler for things being right. Um, so, what I wanted to talk about is, there's a lot of carrots, a lot of incentives out in the world, and not just in the United States, for landing clean vehicle and clean energy investments. The Canadian budget just recently has some significant investment incentives, and of course, the U.S. has put forth some incentives on building out chargers and making a more robust grid. All kinds of infrastructure and investments like that. And then there's the Inflation Reduction Act. Inflation Reduction Act covers a whole host of things, not least of which were things addressing climate change, but also prescription drug prices and making our tax filing go a little faster with some more resources to the IRS and some higher tax rates for some folks, but incentives for clean manufacturing and clean vehicles. And those are the two things I'm going to talk a little bit about. And the IRS tax code here in the US is very much alphabet soup. And because it's alphabet soup, I'm going to start with a level set of there are three parts of the IRA that address vehicle incentives, so purchase or acquisition. The first is called 30D. Now under 30D, this is for consumers to purchase or lease a new clean vehicle. And these are light vehicles usually under the 30D. 45W is a new or used commercial vehicle. The interesting part about that, excuse me, is that companies that lease vehicles, that is their commerce. And so they also qualify here. So a leased vehicle would qualify under 45W, and that can be sold to a consumer or to a business, it doesn't matter. The lease company gets the credit. And then there is a new credit in here for used clean vehicles. Now, I should also say clean vehicles for the first time includes fuel cell vehicles as well as battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids, but not just regular hybrids. So fuel cell, battery electric, and plug-in hybrid all count. On the manufacturing side, there's a couple of programs in the IRA, and then they added some more funding to some existing programs. So there's 45X, and this is really the big kahuna. 45X has a number of really very rich incentives for manufacturing on an ongoing basis. I'll talk a little bit more about that. There is a credit for $35 per kilowatt hour produced every year. So for a battery cell plant, they would make $35 credit per kilowatt hour. If they put it into modules and packs, that's $45 a kilowatt hour because there's an additional 10 for that. It also covers 10% of the costs for critical minerals extraction and processing. 48C is an advanced energy project credit for converting or building new factories. The ATVM, or the Advanced Technology Vehicle or Advanced Technology Vehicle Program, is an existing program that's been around since about 2011, and that is a low-cost loan program for those conversions. And then there's a grant program, the Domestic Manufacturing Conversion Grants, which nobody calls DMCG, but I had to put it on the chart with the alphabet soup and make it look good. So think of like the bottom row is things for manufacturers to incentivize production, and the top row is for acquisition of vehicles, new and used and leased and purchased. Now, those are all very, complicated things. So I tried to make a nice a chart to compare on the purchase side of things. So on the purchase side of things, there's those three things: the 30D for consumers, 45W for commercial vehicles, and 25E for used vehicles. And you can see that a number of the provisions are exactly the same. They have to be a qualified manufacturer, it has to be a Clean Air Act compliant vehicle. For these, I'm only counting the light vehicle provisions of these parts of the tax code. The commercial vehicle also covers medium and heavy duty vehicles. The batteries have to be at least 7 kilowatt hours. The purchaser has to have a tax liability, although in the case of the 45W, it can be a future tax liability because they can carry those credits forward. The vehicle must be sold by a dealer, and it cannot be for resale. So this is not a churn and burn to just make credits. Then there are a number of credits or conditions that only apply to the retail consumer. And that is that it has to be assembled in North America, that there are price caps of $55 for cars and $55,000 for cars and $80,000 for everything else, CUVs, SUVs, and trucks. There is an income cap that is roughly $300,000 for married, $150,000 for single, and for used vehicles that also counts. That MSRPs is $25,000 for a used vehicle, and the adjusted gross income caps are half that of the new vehicle. So meant to get the used EVs and clean vehicles into the hands of consumers with more moderate means. There are also these conditions about where the critical minerals and battery components come from. I'll go into those in a little more detail, but that is something that we just learned a little bit more about at the end of March, and I did a webinar on that last week, and I'll give you some more of that. And then there's this provision that no critical minerals can be sourced from a foreign entity of concern, and I'll also give us some more detail for that. 45W says it must be for business use, though I said the Treasury Department is interpreting business use as a leased company that is their business and they're using it by leasing it to someone. And the used vehicles also have a 2-year, must be 2 years old and must have its first resale after the law was signed in August. So these provisions went into effect at the signing of the bill in August. These provisions, price caps and the modified adjusted gross income caps, went into effect January 1 this year. These we just learned about at the end of March and went into effect April 18th. And then that critical minerals foreign entity of concern thing, we don't know when that's going to start to kick in because it's not been specified yet. So countries of concern are the flags on this page. And the law refers back to the State Department and what the list that they keep of countries that are state sponsors of terrorism and other, reasons why the US would say that these are not countries they want to do business with. And the language in the IRA itself says that the entity cannot be owned, controlled, or subject to the jurisdiction or direction of a government of a foreign country that is a covered nation. And these are the current covered nations. Of course, the really big one is China. And China has a huge grip on the EV supply chain. China is the black bars on this Bloomberg chart. They're dominating lithium and cobalt refining. They're a big player in nickel refining. They dominate production of battery cells, cathodes, anodes, electrolyte, separator. I mean, this is a big reason why that foreign entity of concern provision is in the IRA, is a US government intention to build a supply chain that is separate from China. You'll note that the US is pink, bright pink, and that Mexico and Canada show up in the rest of the world in that teal, blue or green color. When you look at the minerals sourcing that are required for batteries, Canada has a significant amount of the critical minerals required, and their new budget also devotes some money to developing those resources and mines and refining and processing steps. I do not see quite as much in Mexico. There is some in some of the materials, but this is really the focus of the IRA, that provision that's hanging out there. We expect that direction will come from the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy also manages the foreign entity of concern for any nuclear materials. And so that will be similarly managed by the Department of Energy to control the sort of national security aspects of the foreign entity of concern in the IRA. The critical mineral content requirements ramp up year over year. They can be sourced from any country that is either the US or a country where there is a little f, little t, little a agreement, little free trade agreement countries. I emphasize that those are little f, little t, little a, because it does not have to be a formal free trade agreement like the USMCA. And you'll note that Japan has made the list because they have an executive agreement around some of the minerals. These ramp up, from 40% up to 80% by 2027, and that critical minerals for the foreign entity of concern does not affect until January 1st, 2025. When you turn to components, and the critical minerals, there's 48 minerals and or compounds in the periodic table that are covered by the critical minerals listing. And there are only 5 that are covered by the Japan agreement, US-Japan agreement. And then a similar agreement is in the works with the EU. On battery components are everything that are short of a battery pack that convert chemical energy to electrical energy, basically. So it's anodes and cathodes and separators, all of the things that go up to pack. So battery components. And there's a little bit of confusion here still that some components are also classified as critical minerals, and there hasn't been any clarification that I've seen on that yet. But critically here, this ramps up very quickly to 100% by 2029. The foreign entity of concern kicks in on the components next year, January 1st, and these all must be North American assembled. There is no, Japan or Australia or anybody else in here. This is tied strictly to North American. And with the trade shifts that we've seen, and perhaps someone like Lawrence or someone else may cover, there have been since the U.S. Has sort of targeted China for trade actions and ramping up the tariffs and other barriers to trade with China, we have seen a big shift of electrical and electronic componentry that was once sourced from China, now is coming from the rest of the world, and one of the biggest sources in the rest of the world is Mexico. So battery components and content requirements going all the way to 100% and being sourced only from North America. Those incentives for the manufacturing, I mentioned, this production credit for 45X. It also covers solar and wind and a number of other things. Because these are tax credits, there's not really a budget tied to them. They're, revenue not collected by the IRS, basically. So there's that $35 a kilowatt hour, and modules go 10 to 45. The 45 includes the 35. This is a significant incentive, a production credit year after year for every kilowatt hour produced. There are some producers who say that this is going to produce for them about $1 billion a year at the rate of production that they expect to be making in a few years. That advanced energy project credit is about $10 billion in credits was what was allocated. And this is expand, establish, or re-equip factories to build not only vehicles, but also fuel cell equipment and batteries, or energy storage. The ATVM adds some more money to the loan program and then makes the loans a little bit more accessible, especially to smaller companies. And the domestic manufacturing conversion grant is a lot smaller program, but is really tied just to the clean vehicles that I mentioned before, the BEV, fuel cell, and plug-in hybrids, but hybrids is also included in that. So significant carrots, big carrots in the US for locating clean vehicle and other associated componentry and minerals in the US or free trade agreement countries. Now, carrots often come with a stick too. That's a kind of little stick. This, what I'm going to talk about, is a giant stick. The EPA just came out last week with their draft emission rules. And these rules are going to require the US reach about 67%, 2/3 of the market, to be an electric vehicle by 2032. And previously, August 2021, the Biden administration had set a target of 50% of the market to be electric vehicles by 2030. So this is I've kind of drawn a dotted line here about how sharp that goes up. The current share in the first quarter of 2023 was 8.5%. So these draft emission rules are, out as a first salvo in this debate that will go on for possibly a year or more for the credits that will, or for the emission standards that will go into effect for 2027 and beyond. And this is a long, drawn-out process. There's a number of different options in what was put out by the EPA. This is the most stringent one, and these are the most stringent emissions rules that the US has ever put forth. So in combination with, there's some carrots to do this, and to do this in the US, North America, or free trade countries, there are also significant sticks on the regulatory side, on the vehicle emissions that are being contemplated. With that, I am going to stop presenting and let us hand the baton over to our next presenter. Thank you.
Kristen, thank you very much. We see that there are a lot of carrots around, but we got to look for them. And we also got to be very observant of what the rules are to get those carrots. Well, both you, Kristen, and Thomas were talking about Mexico. Let's see what's going on and what we're going to be doing together. Manuel, you're in a hot city now with Tesla's Gigaplant getting started. A lot of stuff going on. Why don't you tell us a little bit of what the industry looks like today?
Yes, Ralph. Thank you very much for the invitation and being here with other panelists with a very interesting topic. I have a presentation. I will go fast over it as the time is not enough. Part of this information, you already know it. Today's automotive industry in Mexico is of this size, the fourth producer of auto parts in the world, the first supplier of auto parts to the US, 2,000 auto parts manufacturers in the country. But we also moving to have more R&D centers in Mexico with a lot of engineers working on them. 2 million jobs for the auto industry, and so on. No? Today's the combustion engine plants are in these states. As some of you may be not so familiar with the Mexican geography, but you will see that there are mainly in three parts: in the center of Mexico, in the north part of Mexico, and in the Bajío region. And we have quite a good number of plants in different parts. And in New Year's, in this year, recently, there are Chinese companies establishing operations in Mexico. For heavy vehicle industry, there are also plants, but they are mainly in what we call the NAFTA backbone states around the 57 is highway, because we produce the trucks and they go rolling to their market. That is mainly 80% is going to the US market. Talking about production of vehicles, we were close to complete 4 million cars per year. Now we are speeding up the production. Maybe by the end of the year, this year, we want to be 3.5 million cars, and we expect to reach 4 million cars by 2024-25. And these are the brands that are producing the most in Mexico. And from their production, most of it goes to exports. No? So you'll see that 4 million that we are expecting by 2025, and by brands who are going to produce it. Talking about heavy vehicle industry vehicles is the same. The blue, the dark blue represents the exports, and the gray one what is for internal market. Well, for Mexico, this is important because the auto industry represents 20% of our manufacturing GDP. After being an oil country, now we are a country that has manufacturing as its more important income for its economy. And from the manufacturing, the automotive industry is the most important. And the production of cars is big, but I think auto parts industry in Mexico is still bigger. Last year, we completed $105 billion of production of auto parts, mainly for exports, and the exports are mainly for the US. Well, so what is happening today? We are moving towards the electrification of our industry. And in the US, there's a lot of investments, as the previous speakers had mentioned. There are different brands producing or establishing operations in different parts of the United States. In Canada, something is also happening. And in Mexico, we are also starting plants. I put there Tesla, but it had not started the construction of its plants in Nuevo León, close to Monterrey. But this will continue growing because new OEMs are giving new announcements, or they are going to produce electric cars in their current facilities. And maybe some of them will decide to put new facilities. Talking about the production of electric vehicles, what we'll see in the next years, well, I don't know, maybe these numbers will grow up after seeing Christine's presentation of the carrots and the stick, but we're expecting to produce, well, some analysts say 23 million cars by 2029, from today to 2029. 23 million is a lot of cars, especially because the industry is just establishing. But what we see very interesting is there are newcomers in the industry. They already talk about Lucid, but there's also Rivian. Tesla is always there. But there are other brands like Canoo, Arrival, and others that are new players. And the traditional car makers are losing quite a good bit of their market share with newcomers. These are announcements, but this is changing. Maybe Pepe Sosaya can tell us a more actual number on this. But we are talking producing 3 million cars in Mexico. Obviously, these are official announcements, but we expect this will grow in the next months. But this is in our country, our main problem. We are not preparing Mexico for the electrification of our industry. We are preparing our industry for exports, but not for an internal market. And the important reason is because we don't have the infrastructure. If you see, well, some people say we have a little bit more than 1,000 charging stations. Some people may say 2, 3, or 5,000 charging stations. That's not enough. We need to grow our infrastructure, and this is something that we had to work in Mexico still to go into electrification. My message in this is that we are preparing our industry mainly for exports to the US, but we'll have to make a double click and see what we're going to do to electrify our industry in Mexico, because we don't have carrots, we don't have stick, but we need to change our industry. Thank you very much, and if you have any question, we are here open to receive it. Thank you.
Manuel, thank you. Very interesting figures. We're going to see where they go. Jose, what sort of insight can you give us as to what's going to happen in the next couple of years?
Thank you so much, Ralph, and thank you to the U.S.-Mexico Chamber of Commerce for the invitation to participate in this great panel. As you all know, we have seen a lot of information already about Mexico. So I'm going to be more focused in some certain facts. And by the way, I'm just going to be reading these facts, so make sure I don't make any mistakes. First of all, and before starting the charts, I would like to say that the changing of the automobile technology worldwide is the great contribution to the auto industry, to the environment. I think that's one step that we haven't remarked enough, but this contribution should be recognized by the whole world. Second, I would say this change on technology also will, in a way, affect all of us, regardless if you have a car or not. We all have a direct or indirect dependence or relationship with cars. So this change of technology will affect all of us. The numbers and the information we will be providing is complemented by the information that has already been provided. Is also a fact that shows the great interest of the industry to achieve the goals on electromobility and clean energy also technologies, because we talk about electric vehicles, but there's no different car manufacturers that will also take place in the market. Very important to point out, first of all, change, and in April 2022, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released their mitigation report, which outlines 6 crucial steps. And as a result of this, that's where we are seeing such an increasing speed in changing the auto technology. First of all, no more fossil fuels, and we cannot allow any new fossil fuel infrastructure, but this is already happening. There is a great, I would say, idea of modifying the whole technology in a very short period of time. I think that should be revised and make it more I would say, real. The timing that has been established at the COP by the different countries, I don't see it achievable, but I think we ought to be more realistic on where really this whole process will end. Global emissions must peak before 2025 and be reduced by 43% by 2030. I'm sorry, guys, I don't want to be pessimistic. I don't see it happening up to that number, to that percentage. But I think the effort is in the process, but it's not only in changing the technology. It has to change a lot of things. It has to transform the systems. We have to decarbonize the industry. We have to have a zero carbon buildings and focus on the retrofit. We have to redesign cities for low carbon transportation also, and shift to clean fuel. We have to protect and restore natural landscapes and improve agricultural. But this will not only be the responsibility of the different actors that I am putting on this chart. The responsibility is for all of us. We all have to do our part. we do all have to contribute to this process, and not only to go to electromobility or clean energy mobility, but to help the environment to be a cleaner environment. In this chart, you can see the CO2 emissions by each economic sector, and also the CO2 emissions by the transport sector. This, of course, this will be changing, and we really hope that in the years that we're establishing the international compromises, but again, at the speed it is going, I don't see it happening. It's happening in certain small countries, but not in the largest countries as we hope it will be happening by this time. We need to do more, we need to do it faster, and we need to compromise more. Also, the global automobile industry is undergoing a rapid transition from reliance on internal combustion engine vehicles to battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. These processes are shown here, how the percentages are in each kind of vehicles and each kind of technology, and also the numbers. As U.S. automakers pivot in the electric vehicles era, cross-border operators say Mexico is more than ready to seize the moment. I think we are ready as a country to seize the moment, but we are not at the speed that is needed. Again, Mexico has the compromise. Mexico wants to do the effort, but I think we have to speed up the process in Mexico to make sure that infrastructure is ready. The number of vehicles produced are getting to the numbers that are compromised. And many Mexico's advantage holds for electric vehicles as much for ICE, such as skill, labor, force, and experience. This is not new news. This is known by the worldwide, as already was presented in previous charts by other participants. Mexico is the 7th largest automaker of light vehicles in the world. So that doesn't come just because of the number of labor that is available, but that comes because of the capacity of that labor, the training, the skills of that labor, the compromise, but also the legal framework that the country has to attract that foreign investment to our countries. As you can see on the Mexico CV and PHEV sales, the numbers are very, very low. These numbers accounts only for the 4% of the total internal sales in Mexico. So as I mentioned already several times, Mexico is not at the speed that it's needed. We need to have more information, to provide more information to the consumers. We need to compromise more in changing the needed infrastructure. And of course, we need to compromise more in having the public policies that are needed. Also, in 2019, Ford is starting the production of electric car, the Mustang Mach-E, and it's already been fully produced in Mexico and exported to the whole world, but mainly, of course, to the United States. As you saw in the numbers that were presented by other participants, the total production of Mexico, 90% is exported to the US, Canada, and the rest of the world. So we only account in the internal market for 10% of the production and some imports of new vehicles that are being manufactured in our country. There are several plants that are already in Mexico and have announced new plans to modify some of their process, do some investment in their actual process to start producing electrical vehicles. Those examples are General Motors, BMW, Tesla that has already announced a new plant, completely new plant, and other plants that have not yet made public declarations, but are ready to start changing some of their production to electric vehicles. Here you can see that on one significant barrier to achieving zero tailpipe emission is the gap on electric vehicle adoption between wealthier and developing economies. That is also not news. The electric vehicles that are being produced right now are more expensive. And since the market is very slow, the prices will most likely continue at those levels in the future. This affects more emerging markets than leading markets. Also, will also have to work on their carbon footprint. They have to reduce waste and pollutants, implementation of technologies to minimize pollutant emissions, and participating actively in educating employees about environmental conservation. But in this point, it's very important that some action that the auto industry in Mexico is doing, they are not only compromising themselves, they are compromising their suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, to make sure that they comply with the carbon footprint that is being requested in the near future. Hopefully, this action will be a chain action that will start changing this process faster in the near future. Also, compliance plans to meet targets could compromise of our principal elements. First, increasing sales of EVs and PHEVs. Investing in technologies to lower the entire value chain carbon footprint. Pricing, sales, and marketing approaches to encourage customers to buy EVs, PHEVs, smaller and less powerful engines. This point is, again, very relevant. I already mentioned that we needed to have more, to provide more information. And of course, pooling with another companies like BMW and Jack with the E10X. This is also very relevant. I think companies will have to compromise to do it themselves or in joint ventures with other manufacturers. But what else is required? And I already mentioned a little of this. There are some elements of transition, the legal framework. At least in Mexico, new legal framework will have to be modified or created to accompany these new technologies. Also, infrastructure and communications will have to be established, and a lot of invested is needed in that area, especially, well, at least in Mexico. One very important and relevant part is incentives, fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. Mexico already have some fiscal incentives, but we need to improve that. We need to really make incentives get to the buyer of new cars for them to incentivize them to buy electric or new technology. And consumer education. And again, I always said that it's not only consumer education. Consumer education, it's all of us, regardless if you have or if you're going to buy a car or not. But what else is required? Well, investment, attraction, and new productive projects requires an ecosystem that ensures clean energy supplies at competitive costs throughout the entire automotive value chain in Mexico. We as an association were invited to participate in the discussion of changing the electric law in Mexico to the Congress. And to one question of a congressman of, okay, what do you want, guys? What do the auto industry wants? And what I said, I have 4 words for it. And I said, we need clean energy available and available in all the country and at a very competitive cost. Regardless who is going to provide it, private, public sector, or both. I think the most convenient part will be that both can provide it. So with that, we can assure that there will be enough clean energy for the new technologies. And one thing that I also would like to say to close my presentation. The new technologies are coming to the whole world with Mexico or without Mexico. Thank you very much.
Jose, thank you for an excellent presentation that gives us some things to think about. You know, can we do it and how are we going to do it?
That's right. That's right.
Larry, are you up?
I am up.
There you are. Larry, tell us a little bit about what the rules of the road are and what we got to think about in order to accomplish all of this as far as the law.
All right, are you seeing my screen?
I am, sir.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Ralph, and thanks to the chamber for having me. I am a partner in Barnes, Richardson and Colburn, so we represent importers and exporters, but in this context, importers in the automotive industry and manufacturers in the automotive industry, and we help companies that are building vehicles in Mexico comply with the US rules to establish those vehicles as duty-free imports under the USMCA and under the NAFTA before that. As everyone who is participating today in this program knows, the US, Mexico, and Canadian auto industries are very, very tightly integrated. So the companies for years sort of operated on the notion that it is one industry, and the borders create friction between against efficient manufacturing, and any customs duties are problematic in terms of efficiencies in production. So starting well before the NAFTA, but we're going to start just at the NAFTA in 1994, the rules of origin were established in order to let me move my slide. The rules of origin were established in order to determine which vehicles qualified as North American vehicles for purposes of reducing that friction at the border. So there's a good 30 years of experience in managing the supply chains to establish that vehicles are originating. So what I want to do today is talk about what the rules are under the USMCA and how the industry, how those rules impact the way the industry works as it moves through this electrification process. A lot of this dovetails with what Kristen had to talk about the tax incentives for production and purchasing of vehicles, of clean vehicles. Instead of looking at it as a tax incentive here, what we have are customs duty incentives. So in other words, if you meet these obligations, then your vehicle will cross the border into the US from Mexico duty-free. So I'll quickly talk about the rules of origin, how specifically electric vehicles are treated, and then just do a brief discussion of this dispute that happened between the US and Mexico with respect to the rules of origin. Then we'll wrap up. I'll be happy to take any questions in the next segment. So this is a quick summary of all the rules of origin for motor vehicles. They're divided up between passenger and light truck rules, heavy trucks, and the so-called other vehicles. The most complex rules are the passenger light truck vehicles. And what this shows is that by July of this year, 75% of the value of the vehicle needs to be originating, needs to be North American. So that's called the regional value content. And under the NAFTA, that was basically the rule that mattered. So you had this regional value content test. If you got to 62.5%, the vehicle qualified and you could certify it and cross the border duty-free. When the USMCA was being negotiated, there were a number of additional rules put in place to ensure that 75%, or what used to be 62, but it's now 75% regional value, was allocated in a way that reduced the ability of non-North American materials to satisfy or help satisfy the regional value content rule. So in other words, instead of just saying a blanket 62.5, now we have a blanket 75%, but drilling down into that, the agreement makes much more specific and we could say granular rules. So what that means is for passenger and light trucks, for designated core parts, these are things like engines, transmissions, suspensions, body components, that those individually must hit a 75% value added in North America. to be counted toward originating materials, and those listed materials must themselves be originating in order for the vehicle to qualify. That's going to become very important when we talk about batteries in just a minute. For so-called principal parts, there's greater flexibility for non-originating materials. So you go down to 70% originating. For complementary parts, which is another list of materials which are less critical to the vehicle, that goes down to 65%. So that breakdown between those types of parts is completely new, and again drives investment in North America in order to satisfy those requirements. Then in a development that is completely new to free trade agreements with a capital F, capital T, capital A to take up Kristen's nomenclature, the agreement adds what's called a labor value content requirement. And for passenger and light truck, for passenger vehicles, that rule says that 40%, essentially 40% of the labor has to be at a rate that is at $16 an hour or better. For light trucks, that's 45% of the labor is at $16 an hour or more. So this incentivizes obviously higher wages. A cynical way to look at it is that incentivizes the use of labor in Canada and Mexico, where the rates were already higher. So I will say that I've not seen any data, perhaps others have, as to what the impact this requirement may have had on labor rates in Mexico. Be interested to see that. Then finally, another new requirement is that steel and aluminum used in, actually it's not steel and aluminum used in vehicle production. It is corporate purchases of steel and aluminum must be 70% originating. So the manufacturers need to be able to certify that the steel and aluminum that they've purchased is 70% originating. So that is true for heavy trucks as it is for passenger vehicles and light trucks. The other vehicles, just in case you're interested, is primarily off-road vehicles, including industrial off-road vehicles, but also off-road recreational vehicles as well. So those are a much simpler set of rules. So these new rules are all sort of driving the increasing North American investment for vehicle components. But this part of it, that these core parts need to be originating, is very much relevant to the conversation today about electrification. So the battery that moves the vehicle, so-called advanced batteries in USMCA terms, is listed as a core part. Therefore, for the vehicle to be originating, the company must be able to say that the battery is an originating component. So the rules of origin that establish for how a battery is determined to be originating or not are phased in over a period of years. So the agreement came into effect July 1st, 2020, and then through January 1st, 2025, the rule is that materials used in the production of the battery must change from any other subheading, and I'll talk about what this means. We don't need to get into the weeds here, but from any other subheading to the battery. So basically, everything that is used in the production of a motor vehicle and really everything else that moves across borders is assigned a tariff classification number. And a lot of these rules are based upon moving products from one tariff classification number to another tariff classification number to show that actual production occurred. So if you move from steel to an auto body door, it clearly shows that, stamping and assembly and painting and everything else happened. So, but in this case, for the first 5 years, almost 5 years of the agreement, the rule allows for really any other change in materials to the finished battery. And what that means is, you can see on this side, what that means is that you can import battery cells from outside of North America, right? So this is a big deal. So importing cells from China or South Korea. South Korea is a big producer of cells. Importing cells from South Korea and then packing them in North America is sort of the intermediate step in battery production. So what I would say is sort of the hard part of putting the cell together, which is using the chemical technology and the critical minerals and all of that to make the cell, then exporting the cells to the United States and packing the cells into the battery. Now that's not uncomplicated. There's a lot of electronics and interconnection to put all the cells together to form a battery pack, but it's not the fundamental manufacturing of the cells. So this rule changes January 1, 2025, that requires a similar change, but it excludes a change from battery cells. So this change is exactly why companies have been scrambling to increase the opportunity to buy batteries or manufacture batteries in North America. And this was happening right away in 2020 when the agreement came into effect. People knew that this was going to happen and that there would have to be battery sources, North American battery sources, by full battery sources, including cell manufacturing, by January 1st of 2025. Layer on top of that everything that Kristen and Thomas talked about in terms of the investment necessary to make battery plants in North America, and then the Biden administration moving forward with the Inflation Reduction Act incentives to manufacture clean vehicles and purchase clean vehicles in North America. The demand for batteries is probably not mathematically correct, but metaphorically exponentially increasing as we get closer to this and increasing the number of incentives for manufacturing and purchasing. So if this is, some people think this is a bad term, but this is industrial policy, right? This is using tax incentives, customs duties incentives to move toward an electrification. And you can see in terms of the need or the movement toward battery factories in North America that it's working, right? So there's investment being done in order to be able to benefit from these incentives. At the same time, I also want to pick up on something else that Kristen said. There is an effort to encourage, I would say, the disengagement with China as a major supply source. So there are concerns about battery production being, having a resilient battery supply chain in North America. Concerns have been raised about the use of forced labor for batteries and minerals used in batteries in China. So, those things, and then there are duties that have been assessed on Chinese products under Section 301, which has to do with unfair trade practices, and Section 232 for steel and aluminum, which has to do with national security. So all of that has created really boom times for investment in battery production in North America as it relates to vehicles. So let's see. And I'm happy to get more or less in the weeds about that in the questions. I know we're close on time. My last thing here is people are probably aware of the fact that Mexico challenged the United States application of the rules of origin to motor vehicles in a formal dispute with a USMCA formal dispute. Canada took the side of Mexico. What this all has to do with is how you calculate that 75% regional value content. And at a very high level, the question is, the regional value content is the ratio between originating and non-originating materials. And the question is whether you count non-originating materials used to make originating materials in North America. So this is an accounting, sort of a math issue. The industry was led to believe, they would say, that in the negotiation stages, that the United States was, or that they were, they were led to believe by the United States that for these core materials, including batteries, that once they were deemed to be originating for purposes of satisfying the requirement that the core parts be originating, that you would count 0 internal non-originating materials. The United States, when the agreement came into effect, then told the industry, no, we never said that, we never meant that. You have to count that non-originating material as if it were not in a core component. So that caused a need to have more originating material. That changed the planning of the industry, and Mexico took that case up to the dispute settlement board and won the case with Canada's support. The interesting thing about it at this point, and the last thing I have to say, and I will be happy to answer questions, is so far nothing has happened. So we're in the period of time where Mexico would be authorized to take some steps to retaliate. I don't know, maybe someone else on the panel knows if there's any behind the scenes discussions going on, if the United States has made any offers to compensate for the difference in interpretation. So nothing significant has happened or publicly has happened, but it should be a case that as a result of this panel, it should be somewhat easier. It's not clear exactly how much easier to qualify vehicles than it would have been otherwise. I will end on that. I know there was a lot of stuff, and I am just, again, I'll say thank you to Ralph, thanks to the chamber, and happy to engage in any discussion.
Thank you very much, Larry. Again, a lot of things to think about. I got a couple of questions. The first is for Manuel and Jose. With Tesla's new gigaplant in Monterrey, they mentioned the amount of investment, $5 billion, 6,000 employees, 12 to 15 months to build. But they also said that the plant is going to be constructed around a brand new production platform in order to reduce costs. And when you look at the cost of Tesla's cars, $45,000, the cost of electric vehicles to become more useful to the greater population is going to have to come down. An indication in that article that President Lopez Obrador and Elon Musk also discussed the possibility of making batteries somewhere in central Mexico, and having a battery plant for Tesla close to the car manufacturing facility would greatly assist in helping to reduce the costs. This is all very interesting. I'm wondering, Manuel and Jose, was there any indication of what incentives were provided by the government or by the state in order to rope Elon Musk in?
Let me excuse myself because Tesla is not a member of our association. So I'm sorry, I cannot participate in this question. So Manuel, it's all yours.
Yeah, Jose, you got to get him on board.
Yeah, but they're still not here, so I have no representation to talk about that. Thank you.
Well, the thing with Tesla is that they have not been so open to share the details of many things. From the little things that I had heard about it is that they are planning to do a vehicle that will be with a lower cost. I don't know exactly the model they're going to build, but I understand it will be a bigger production of a vehicle that will be more affordable. Talking about the manufacturing system, they already have new ways to manufacture in Austin and other plants. And in the announcement of this investment, Mr. Elon Musk has said something about new methodologies. So things we're going to learn, and we had to wait till they announced it because they had not been very open. Today they are more aware of exactly where they're going to build a plant, and as I had heard, the incentives from the government of Nuevo León had not been so much. No, so the decision was not because of the incentives, it was because of the location of Monterrey, the synergies they are going to be able to do with Austin. It's just 6 hours by car from one city to another. And the reality that today, a number of like 25 current suppliers of Tesla had decided to put plants in Nuevo León before the Tesla's announcements in Monterrey. So there's already a hub of suppliers of Tesla here. So there are many things that have helped the decision to come to Monterrey instead of other places. And about the batteries, personally, I had not heard about an official announcement from Tesla. So again, we had to wait till they decide to what they want to share with the public and what they want to keep for the future. But I think most probably they will have to do something. An interesting thing for Mexico, and this is something that not many people have talked about, is manufacturing vehicles of Tesla in Mexico will open their markets to like 46 countries where they can export their vehicle without duties. So that's another reason why they decided to come to Mexico. Because even if they produce them in the US do not have free trade agreements with many countries that Mexico has. No? So that's an advantage that they are going to take on it. And the last thing is the Gigafactory. They're saying that we're going to produce up to 1 million cars. Let's see if that will come.
Well, the news also said that that plant could be the largest vehicle production plant in the world. I guess that remains to be seen. But people within the government, the Mexican government, have basically said that 1/2 of all light vehicles will be electric vehicles by 2030. That's only 7 years away. But General Motors said that's highly unlikely, that it's going to be more like 15%. So I guess the question is, what is the platform that they're going to build? How quickly can they get the plant done and production started? And are there going to be capabilities for Tesla to also manufacture batteries in Mexico? That would be important ingredients.
Well, Tesla's investor call talked about this, and it's slotted below the Model 3. It's smaller. It's a radical departure on how anybody in the world makes vehicles. So it's very, very different what they have in their plans and what they showed to investors and what they're going to do with that plant. And I think Manuel's point of export reach is really important here, because if they're going to make a vehicle and actually achieve those cost savings that they plan to, then that will be something that's in great demand in the world.
Yeah. Kristen, the EPA estimate of 67% by 2032, again, is very interesting as to whether that could be achieved. You know, you've also dealt with the CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. And we've also been talking about Section 301 undergoing a 4-year review by the USTR, which could, reduce the tariffs on things coming from China. We don't know, but achieving 67%, one thing we haven't talked about, we just briefly touched on it a moment ago, is the cost of cars. You can produce, but our buyer is going to be out there. That's going to be dependent not only on the cost of the car, but how far can they drive on a full tank of battery for that, and how many charging stations are going to be available. The EPA says 130,000 are now available. Biden has planned for 500,000. We'll see if that happens as well. So, I mean, you mentioned all those carrots out there. And obviously, the investors are going to look at what's in it for me and what can I do. And then we'll see if the public is out there wanting to buy this to increase the sales to that level. So I think if one thing, this discussion among all of us, I mean, there is some good news, but there's still some questions about how are we going to get there?
Well, I think there's always questions about how are you going to get there and, what might intervene in the meantime. Like, when we started out 2022, we didn't think there would be war in Europe. We started out in a few years ago, we didn't know there'd be a pandemic. Lots of things happened that intervene. Affordability is absolutely an issue, not just of EVs, but of all vehicles right now.
Yeah.
The price increases have started to moderate. Incentives are starting to ramp up a little bit as production is starting to normalize. There are still chip problems. There are still production disruptions. There's still all kinds of things that are making it difficult to make cars, but it's always difficult to make cars. And there's, people who do supply chain management are, minor magicians sometimes to keep those lines running. I'll point to, that 67% is a very high number. And there was a recent, just this week, Gallup poll that came out that said American adoption of EVs is slow. Relatively few currently own one, about 4%, or are seriously considering purchasing one, 12%. 43% say they might consider buying one in the future. And here's the kicker, 41% unequivocally say they will not ever buy an EV. So 41% and 67%, this doesn't work. So if there really is 41% of Americans who will never consider this, then that's going to be a really tough target to hit.
Yeah, I think I told you that I own a Santa Fe made by Hyundai, but a friend of mine who had never driven a Tesla before had to rent one at Hertz because there weren't any other cars available. And he didn't know how to operate something within the car and was looking for the operating booklet in the glove compartment. But there weren't any latches or anything to open up the glove compartment.
Yeah.
So he had to call a friend of his who told him, you just get into the car and say, open the glove compartment. So, I mean.
Yeah,
Yes,
and charging is getting built out too. The federal money in the US is being pushed out through a program called NEVI, I think National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure or something like that. In grants, block grants to the state basically, and each state you have to, put stations along your major interstate highways at this interval. They have to have this target of uptime. They have to meet a number of requirements. If there's any money left over, you can put electric vehicle stations on other non-federal roads. But it's really, up to each state on how they're going to participate in that program and build out that infrastructure for high-speed charging. And, there's all the technology in the battery side, going to batteries that are less costly, like lithium LFP, the lithium iron phosphate batteries that CATL makes. They charge a little faster and they don't have as much range. So you need a lot of charging around to take that. But, most people don't drive 300 miles a day. Most of your drive is going to be handled with what you plug your car into your garage, but
you're absolutely
a lot of
correct
people don't
on
have a
that.
garage. So there's some big hurdles to handle.
Well, listen, I think we've discussed a lot today, and I very much appreciate your contribution and your expertise in providing what you did. I'd like to say to all the attendees, and by the way, we've been able to keep almost all the attendees since we started, so that's very good. But for all the attendees, I'm going to put all the presentations in a PDF format and get it all to you by Friday. And also, we're going to do some editing to the video. So you'll be able to go to our website and see the video or get all the presentations if you want to get them there. So I thank you again for all the time and effort. And I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot of each other from now on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.